the wisdom in the adaptations is something that I've come to appreciate in some of the more recent trainings I'm getting as a psychotherapist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this sort of understanding of like sort of depathologizing
Right.
what clients or patients go through.
Right.
And I've heard you talk actually in speaking about addiction,
Yeah.
that we should consider the intelligence or the wisdom in the addiction, right? That there's something right about the addiction, even though we tend to focus on everything that's wrong with it. Can you talk about the link to addiction here and why this depathologizing framing is valuable and important?
Well, it's a question of whether we want to hold on to a certain model or whether we want to really understand what's going on. The medical model has addiction as a disease largely inherited, which is genetic nonsense. As I said earlier, there's no genes that code for addiction, nor are there genes that if you don't have them, you can't get addicted. So while there might be certain sensitivities which have to do with certain genetic predispositions to do with sensitivities, as I mentioned before, a predisposition is not the same as a predetermination.
Mm-hmm.
So to really understand what's going on in addiction, let's look at what an addiction is. So I define addiction as well, obviously it's a complex psychophysiological process, but it's manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief in and therefore craves, but suffers negative consequences as a result of, and has trouble giving up despite the negative consequences. So short-term relief, pleasure, craving, long-term harm, inability to give it up. So that by definition, then we clearly get that addictions could be to substances, and they often are, from alcohol to cigarettes to the illicit substances like opiates and stimulants and so on. But they could also be to shopping, to eating, to work, to gambling, to sex, to pornography, to internet gaming, to the internet itself, to extreme sports, and so on, to any number of activities. And the issue is not the activity so much as the internal relationship to it. If it's characterized by craving, pleasure, short-term relief of some kind, negative consequences, and difficulty giving it up, you got an addiction. I don't care what the activity is. So, no, depending on how whether we're going to play this game or not, I could ask you, according to that definition, and without asking you to be specific in any way, have you, yes or no, had any kind of an addictive pattern in your life?
Of course.
Okay. If the answer is yes, then without asking you when it was and what to, let me just ask you this. What did it do for you in the short term that you liked about it?
It's funny that you're using the past tense. You're assuming I'm well adjusted and addiction free, which is not necessarily the case. I'm very kind of sensitive to these things. Like I watch my behavior very closely for whatever reason, and I just see tons of things that I wish I wasn't doing. And probably the easiest one is just like Twitter and how much I reach for my phone. And to answer your question, it's because it provides a temporary vacation from the noise in my head.
Okay. So you're looking for some rest, some mental rest.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So is that in itself a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing.
Okay.
The rest, the need for the rest is a very real and valid thing as far as I could tell.
Absolutely. In other words, the addiction is not your primary problem. It's not a disease. It's an attempt to solve a problem.
Right.
And in broad terms, addiction is always an attempt to solve the problem of emotional pain, however that emotional pain shows up. For example, mental noise. So my mantra on addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Mm-hmm. Now, if I want to look at why the pain, I'd have to really look at your life and my life and everybody's life. Something happened to create that mental noise. And we live in a culture, of course, that delivers and instigates a lot of mental noise. But again, it still has to do with child development. And that mental noise is not an automatic attribute of a human being. So rather than seeing the addiction as the primary problem, we could look at the issue of mental noise as a primary problem, and look at how it arose and what maybe can be done to quiet it in ways that don't have negative consequences. So addiction all of a sudden goes from this disease model to a response to human experience model, which means that treating it needs to take into account human experience and the traumatic imprint that human experience carries.
Hey, thanks for checking out that clip of the Mindspace podcast. You can get the full episode here on YouTube or check it out on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks, and be well.